Hey there folks, it's Scott once again, and I'm coming back to you with another movie review. It's of the 2004 Canadian-American horror film, Highwaymen. The film was directed by Robert Harmon, and he did films like the original Hitcher with Rutger Hauer and C. Thomas Howell, and he did another film called Nowhere to Run with Jean-Claude Van Damme. And recently, sometime years ago, he did a lot of TV movies like Jesse Stone with Tom Selleck, if I'm not mistaken. And then he hasn't really done much nothing much since then. So, anyways, the film was produced by Bradley Jenko, Carol Kemp, and Mike Marcus. The film was written by Craig Mitchell and Hans Bauer. The film stars Jim Caviezel, Rhona Mitra, Frankie Faison, Colm Feore, and Andrea Roth. And the film was released by New Line Entertainment. Sadly, did not do very well at the box office. It was just dumped into theaters, and it was released on February 13th of 2004. And it barely made around $300,000, I believe, U.S. I think it may have been released overseas, but in total it made like around $2.3 million. So there you go. But let me check, be sure. See if I'm gonna look on IMDb if it would hurry up and go back. Computers, they are fucking slow sometimes. Yeah, it made $367,000 US, so not very good. But anywho, I really think it's an underrated film, and yeah, I mean, it's not quite as good as the original Hitcher or action-packed as like Nowhere to Run, but it's a solid underrated thriller. I liked it. Wish I would have seen it in theaters at the time. But yeah, I'll get to the main plot. Basically, Rennie Cray, Jim Caviezel's character, as a doctor, he's tracking down this guy who's a serial killer using his vehicle to pretty much murder women just at random, just for whatever for his own reasons, mainly for insurance scams and whatever. Earlier in the opening scene, we see him run down his wife while his wife buys fruit, and Cray tries his best to run down and save her, but he's unable to, and just hits her and chases him down supposedly. But then we fade out and we flash forward to about 5 years later, and he's on the road tracking him down, and he's driving this '68 red Barracuda, and he stops by a farmhouse. Realizes that Fargo was there. He's gotten Fargo himself. I'll explain a little later. Apparently, he's gotten good at repairing his vehicle or changing things, like you see rotors. He did an oil change and some certain tubes, probably radiator tubes more than likely. And he finds an artificial limb in the hay somewhere. And when he opens the trunk, you see that Cray has collected some of these artificial limbs for a while. And I'll get to why he's been taking them and why Fargo is all messed up. But anyways, meanwhile, we see that Molly, who's apparently a senior, she had a traumatizing past. Her parents were killed in a car accident, and as a result, she cannot drive because of that. So she has basically friends drive her home, and her friend Alex, who is Andrea Roth's character, drives her home. And meanwhile, apparently, Cray is driving around, kind of putting on a scanner to kind of listen to see if there's any unusual activity. And also, by the way, as Alex is driving, apparently a 1972 Plymouth pepper green vehicle is following them and follows them into the tunnel. And apparently there's some kind of vehicle that's broken down, some kind of asphalt truck, I think it is, and they have to stop. But apparently this semi-truck is unable to stop and actually ends up killing the person that's wanting to get help. And as a result, that driver himself is also injured and needs help. And Alex tries to get help via payphone because apparently their cell phones are not working underneath that tunnel. But apparently the payphone wiring has been cut off, and the 72 Plymouth is near her and actually toys with her. It actually hits her, and she's actually on the hood of the car, but ends up and Fargo's driving, and apparently comes to a full stop, and she's kind of thrown off. And Molly sees this happening and tries to drag her off. And Fargo opens the passenger side door, it takes Molly's picture a couple times, and then hears the sirens, and he drives off. And Macklin, who's Frankie Faison's character, is called in to kind of investigate the situation. Meanwhile, Cray has heard about this on his scanner and goes down there to investigate himself. And upon this, we see that Molly's kind of in shock, and then somewhere up above, I don't know how she got there. And Macklin notices it, and so does Cray. And Cray's thinking to himself, this could be his one chance to maybe get at Fargo. And they do eventually end up meeting, and mainly because Cray knows a bit about Fargo, why he's doing this, and basically Molly's pretty much his only witness and mistake, and that he's going to come back for her, and warns her about him, and they can basically help each other out to some degree. And she's, of course, reluctant, and we, the audience, isn't sure if we should trust him, despite the fact that he's kind of the good guy, but we kind of learned that he's changed quite a bit from where he was 5 years ago, but I'll get to that. So basically, Molly has one of her other friends, Ray Boone, I believe, a male friend of hers, and then apparently Fargo ends up following him too, and actually rams into Ray's car and ends up flipping that car over, and as a result, Ray's really severely injured and probably dead at this point, but Fargo is able to chain up the car to his vehicle and drag the car across the road, and Cray is in his red Barracuda is able to see this and tracks him down, and is able to kind of be even and convince Molly to jump inside of his vehicle, since his driver's side door ends up getting pulled off. And Fargo, being well aware of this, is basically knows what Cray's about and what his intentions are to get at him, and to basically use Molly as bait so that he can get at him. And supposedly claims that, after several 100,000 miles, you'll be just like me, pretty much. Kind of, taunting Cray and whatnot. Then eventually, Cray and Molly eventually go to this junkyard filled with with a lot of car parts or whatever, and he tries to, explain the situation to Molly. Basically, he ran over his wife, of course, and then he eventually tracked him down, or caught up with him, and actually ended up ramming his car into his car, and caused a great deal of problems for Fargo. And one of his eyes is messed up. That's why one of his headlights has no light in them. I believe his entire left arm, has been replaced with the artificial limb. And then apparently one of his legs is also either the left or the right. I can't remember. I think it was maybe the right one. I could be wrong. It might be the left one. His entire leg has been replaced, and he uses the machinery and metal to pretty much get around in it. And somehow, being the smart guy that he is, he's very crafty and intelligent. The fact that he worked as an insurance agent and did all these scams by running over women down and whatnot, which is what the serial killer aspect comes in. Apparently these were all at random, and that's how he encountered Cray's wife. But he pretty much, found a match in Cray himself. And even though Fargo was considered the killer here, he was pretty much in the hospital recovering, and that's how he somehow crafted all this plan of rebuilding himself from the ground up and making a new car specifically to fit his needs. And as a result, Cray, however, did about 3 years in prison, and he spent the last 2 trying to track him down all that time. And he tries to convince Molly to help him out so that way they can finally get Fargo and finally, be rid of him once and for all. But Molly's, of course, reluctant to do this, but apparently after hearing Fargo's little message about how she takes a pretty good picture and how he's thinking of her as much as she's thinking of him, she decides she's going to go ahead and help him, and eventually they decide to go they eventually encounter Fargo yet again in a little cat and mouse game. And then upon realizing this, Macklin, believing that Cray is the bad guy according to him, but even confronts Cray after Molly had been kidnapped in kind of a car chase between Fargo and Cray at the junkyard. And but eventually he realizes that Cray is not the bad guy, but Fargo is, after he kidnaps Molly and hearing her voice over the scanner. As a result, he ends up helping Cray out, trying to get the understanding of what the whole idea of what Fargo is, gets the idea of insurance scams and just running over women at random, pretty much like I mentioned earlier. And Molly's been held captive somewhere in some kind of garage, having her photo taken. And then he actually intends on keeping her alive for a specific reason and is actually going to take her to a place to where pretty much this all started. And they go on this little trip to where he's going to take Molly, and Fargo's going to end up taking her to basically where he encountered Cray the first time around that motel, and actually buys this red dress, which is what Cray's wife was wearing before she died and got run over by Fargo. And but apparently he's expecting Cray alone, but not Macklin. So they end up meeting at the same place where his wife died, the motel. And we also see there's also junked up cars that Fargo had bought it, for his own insurance scams and whatnot. And there's a little interesting little one-on-one car chase scene, which is done very well. And but unfortunately, Cray's vehicle gets flipped over, and Fargo, thinking he's won, he takes one of the necklaces that originally belonged to Cray's wife, but then somehow a blowout in the tire causes Cray's vehicle to fall back down normally, and of course Fargo being surprised by it. However, with the help of Macklin, because he was able to somehow help out Cray and prevent Molly from getting run over, Molly ends up actually getting into Fargo's car and starts to drive off in it and back out and go in reverse. And Fargo's trying his hardest to get back into it, despite the fact that he's lost his... I forgot to mention, he's in some kind of chair, mechanical chair that Fargo had invented with all the hydraulics and whatnot, which seems like it's impossible, but with a crafty guy like that, it's not surprising that he was able to come up with. But anyways, getting to that, Molly takes his car, reverses it. Fargo's trying his hardest to get back in and regain his control, and Cray's able to start his car back up despite the fact that it suffered some damage. He's able to start it back up and able to put it in drive, and he ends up hitting Fargo off on the front of his car, and then he ends up back in the area of the motel and plunges him into a freaking junked up car, presumably killing him. And then as a result, both Cray and Molly feel are at peace. They even embrace one another, not in a romantic way, but like a kind of a friendly way. I don't know if there's ever going to be any type of romance between them, but at least it's mutual, and they both overcame their fears. Craig got his revenge, and Molly was able to overcome her fear, which is good. And then at the very last minute or so, Macklin's still searching and actually finds Cray's necklace, which is kind of odd. And then apparently Fargo wakes up and revealing that he's not dead, and asks him who he is. And Will Macklin says who he is. He says he's Will Macklin, and then he says state traffic investigator, and actually blows Fargo out, and that cuts away, and that's how it ends. So that's interesting how it ended. So I'll get to some of the stuff that I read about it. I know originally when the test screening cut was premiered, it was like 2 hours and 5 minutes, but a good chunk of that film was cut out. Like you saw some scenes of Cray in prison, some scenes with Cray and his wife earlier, and apparently, let me go back and read the IMDb trivia, and see if it gets there. Macklin struggling with his superiors over the investigation, and we see that Fargo, I guess, commits a few other random murders because of him being a serial killer on the road. And more scenes of Molly and Cray in the junkyard. So, if anything, the film was pretty short. I mean, it went by at a fast pace, but I can tell there was some post-production tinkering with the editing, because like the film itself, it's like barely an hour and 20 minutes. Well, a little over an hour and 20 minutes, but before the end credits, it's like an hour and 16 minutes. So I think they should have at least added maybe 15, 20 minutes back in the film to kind of make the flow of the movie correctly. And I think that's one of the problems I have, is that the editing is obviously there. It's like you see these flash forward of the flashbacks of, Cray tracking down Fargo, which isn't shown till like kind of like the middle of the film. So maybe that's the problem I have, is the editing was felt a little bit off, and how would I say this? Yeah, I think that's pretty much the con, is that the editing was off, and there's a couple of nitpicks, like the whole tunnel scene. I mean, it's interesting, but it's kind of weird how you I don't know. Just certain scenes seemed a bit, off to me. And oh yeah, the ending. That's the thing. Will Macklin was earlier saying that he didn't really believe in killing. He was just basically a state traffic investigator. But apparently that ending was pretty much tacked on by the studio, and it was against the director's wishes. And in fact, I remember reading back in the day on IMDb message boards, supposedly the real Robert Mark Harmon was actually on there, and he described that the film went through a pretty interesting editing process, and he basically was not fond of how that film ended. It was against the director's wishes. So I guess the ending didn't quite make sense, because that was definitely kind of out of character for Will Macklin. Even though if they were going to do that, he should have said, after his name, he should have said, 2 years ago you mowed over my sister, or something like that. And I can kind of see that as the reason, but they didn't add something like that. That was something that the studio decided to tack on. So yeah. So the editing issues and the ending were kind of out of place, and there was a few awkward scenes, like, I guess maybe it's the acting of Andrea Roth that I wasn't really that impressed by. I mean, she was there, but she dies rather quickly. But I'll get to the pros. Overall, I liked how it was kind of fast paced, even though I think it could have benefited. Well, I'll get back to the cons. Actually, I'll go back to the cons. I felt like it needed to, kind of build up the character motivations a little better, and see how Will Macklin was struggling a bit. So I think if they would have added those scenes, it might have made the film a little bit better. But getting back to the pros, the performances were actually pretty solid. I liked how Jim Caviezel had changed over time. Like, he was probably a pleasant guy, since he was a doctor, and apparently the death of his wife and tracking down the serial killer has made him a completely different person. But yeah, Jim Caviezel does pretty convincingly as kind of like a sort of Avenger, tracker down type of guy. Apparently he had no knowledge of cars, but apparently his time in prison and kind of learning and doing it himself, that's why he's able to kind of fix his own stuff as well. Like, he's able to put a new driver door and stuff like that. And Rhona Mitra, she's okay as Molly, kind of like the victim, and trying to, find her way in life and trying to overcome her struggles that kind of handicapped her, because she cannot drive as a result of her parents dying when she was young. And Colm Feore, like I said, is a very underrated actor. He does a great job as Fargo, a man who is basically, kind of like part machine since that accident, since he has one eye missing and most of his body parts have been replaced. So yeah, and the fact that he's a very crafty, intelligent serial killer, showing that he can actually do repairs himself, despite the fact that he's all injured up, shows that he can be a somewhat intimidating villain. So, and a pretty much, kind of an equal match for Rennie Cray. And Frankie Faison, he does fine as the role of Will Macklin, the guy who was basically trying to figure out and investigate the situation from here on out. And of course, he ends up helping Cray, track down Fargo and try to stop him as well. So yeah. And I think really I like the cinematography as well. It was very well shot. I liked how you saw the scenes of the Barracuda, going down this road one way or another. It's done very well. And I also like the music by Mark Isham. He also scored The Hitcher, actually. So yeah, he's worked with with Harmon before, and probably worked on him more than likely in the Nowhere to Run movie with Jean-Claude Van Damme. So yeah. And actually, you can find his score online. And I'll actually put a link down below to Mark Isham's score. And also, oh yeah, I meant to say, I actually watched this on YouTube. I rented it on HD. It was like, I think around 4 something and change. I could be wrong. Let me look this up again. Jeez, this computer just likes to fuck with my serenity. Oh my gosh. I can't remember, but it's cheap. It was definitely cheaper, a little bit cheaper than buying the DVD, which you can get. From what I understood, the cheapest price, I think it's on eBay, and it's like $5.95, just under $6. And I technically do have the film, but it's kind of pixelated. It's on like I bootlegged it some time ago, so yeah. But anywho, I would say, you know, give this film a watch. It's definitely a solid, underrated thriller, and it's very short. Like I said, it's like I said, an hour and 20 minutes, but it goes by at a good pace. Although I feel like it could add a little more to the characters and show their struggles and whatnot. Another 10-15 minutes, I think it would have been almost perfect. There's maybe not as much action, which I guess is another con, but overall, it's a solid little thriller, and I definitely recommend it. And the performances are what keeps it afloat and keeps it from being, you know, a complete waste of time. So yeah, give it a watch. Okay, I think that's going to do it for me. I'm going to actually probably do a trailer reaction to Dark Phoenix because I'm a big X-Men fan. And probably after that, I'm going to eventually rent and review Lady Hawk, which was, I believe it was T or Terrell who requested that, and I'll definitely do that review for her. And then eventually I'll do another review for Life Force. I believe Mara Jade requested that, so I'll do that next. Anywho, I'm going to end it right here, folks, and I will see you in another video. Later.